Well, that was a lot. That was a lot. Let's do a quick review. We heard three passages of Scripture today. Well, we participated in one, but we heard two passages of Scripture today. The 23rd Psalm, which we know as "The Lord is my shepherd." It's one of the most familiar of all the Psalms. It's about, the image, of course, is that God is a shepherd who cares for the sheep wherever the sheep are and brings them home. Then we had a passage from the Gospel of John, part of the what's called the Good Shepherd Discourse, where Jesus uses the example of the shepherd and the sheep as a way of describing his relationship with his followers. And then we had a story about Dorcas, who is kind and generous to people in her community and makes clothes for them, dies, and Peter brings her back. It sounds a little bit like one of those doesn't belong, doesn't it? But of course it does, and we're going to figure out how that works. So let's start by getting rid of the sheep in the middle of the room. Right? We classically have trouble with this image of the Good Shepherd and the sheep. Well, you don't because you're here. People who tend to have trouble with the image of the Good Shepherd and the sheep are people who have trouble with the whole image of church and sheep. People who, and this is a 21st century word now, I'm sure you've heard somebody derisively refer to people as sheeple. That's people who follow blindly no matter what. They don't think for themselves. Raise your hand if you're one of those. Like I said, if you're here, you probably don't have trouble with this image. Because we understand, right? We've taken some time to look into it. We understand it a little bit better. We understand, for example, that the context of this is that back in the day, in ancient Hebrews, would understand the image of the shepherd as being an image of kingship, right? The king is like a shepherd who cares for and leads and cares for the sheep. It's not about the sheep being willing to follow just because they don't even think, they just do their thing, because that's kind of what sheep are like. It's about the kindness and care of the shepherd, the protection of the shepherd, the willingness of the shepherd to sacrifice everything for the sheep. And as ancient Hebrew people, we understand that. Except we're not. And so we've had lots of discussion about this. And in fact, I noticed when I was looking at some stuff on my computer the other day that several years ago, I did a thing where I had a handout. That was back in the day when I made you do work during the sermon. But I had a handout that was a fill in the blanks. And it was the 23rd Psalm, except it went, "The Lord is my blank. God makes me lie down in blank. God leads me blank." And the idea was you fill in what image of God works for you that creates that same kind of relationship. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Hold that thought. And then the places where that might lead to, or where you might feel that God's kindness is obvious and God's kindness is a little bit less obvious, or where you might need God to be present in your life. Suddenly I'm thinking I should have brought that. Because it's a great thing to do. Honestly, it really is. Look at the 23rd Psalm, look at all of those images, and imagine to yourself, and maybe it is that God as a shepherd works for you. But maybe God as a teacher, God as a minister, any of those things, anything in your life where you see someone that you once knew. God is like so-and-so. You don't have to just put ing on the end of Jesus to make it a verb. We could go Kenning or Grahaming. That image of relationship and wanting to be like that, to live like that, is the essence of what that psalm's about. So when Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd," and then appears to be saying to people, "You don't believe because you're not part of my flock," as if there's some ownership there. we again might run into this same trouble of sheep and shepherd. In fact, it sure sounds like Jesus is being exclusive and saying, my flock are the ones who follow me, as if there's some ownership there. How do you feel about that? Interesting thing about this whole sheep and shepherd image thing is that we tend to focus on the idea, the relationship that is there as the one who leads and the ones who follow. That's how it works, right? We follow God. We do whatever God says. God takes care of us. God protects us. We're all good. It's all on God. I'm good. Except that's not how it works. Because it's about, and I've said several times now, it's about relationship. And the relationship that you have with God. So when you're filling in the blanks on your 23rd Psalm and thinking of what's a good image of relationship with God, remember it's a two-way street. Because it's really easy to forget that. Unless, of course, you read this passage from the Gospel of John in the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. Because they sneak in an extra word. And we can have the debate on what's a legit or not legit a translation of the Bible another time. But New Revised Standard Version of the Bible throws in an extra word in that bit where Jesus says, you don't belong to my flock. Ooh, I just did it. That's because that's the word. He doesn't say you're not mine or you're not one of mine. He says, you don't belong to my flock. Belonging is a big deal in churches. I don't know if you've noticed lately. Belonging is a big deal. We went through the whole welcoming phase, and now we're in the belonging phase. We are. Because there was a time when you came to church because it was either an obligation or you felt like as it's part of what you did, as it was a societal, peer pressure thing because everybody did it. And then there was the fear part. If you don't go to church, you're going to burn in the fiery lake, and all of that kind of stuff. We went through that part. Okay, some of us are still going through it now. But then we came to the part where we wanted to be welcoming. Whether that was because we realized that people weren't coming to church anymore, or because we had moved on from that whole it's an obligation and we actually want people to feel welcome now thing. It could have been either, probably. But we realized it was important to be welcoming. And so it was important to be friendly and welcoming when people come in the door. Great. Except that means they still have to come in the door. And you're welcoming them to what we do. So if you're going to do what we do and you fit in, you're good. You're welcome here. But wait, we didn't stop there, thankfully. Then we moved to belonging. Because belonging's a different thing. You can be as welcoming as you want, and people still won't feel like they belong. Because belonging is a two-way street. Being welcoming just relies on what you do. Belonging's a different thing. Belonging means that you need to participate. And so that's where your welcoming part's really important, that it's not just a question of being friendly when people come in. It's important to also engage people, find out more about them, who they are, and welcome what they bring. Because that's the part where they might feel like they belong. Is that it's not just a question of fitting in. It's not just a question of me agreeing with what everyone else says. It's not just a question of me feeling like we all dress the same, or we all look the same, or we all drive the same vehicles, or we all live in the same part of town, or any of that. It's about me recognizing that what I bring that's different than all the rest of you is important, it's valued, it's welcome, and it changes the community. It's part of what makes the community. That's what real belonging is about. And so when Jesus says, part of my flock, I think that's what he means. In fact, generally, whatever metaphor Jesus is using, I'm the bread of life, I'm the light of the world, all of those I am things, or all of those metaphors that we make up for Jesus, it's a two-way street. It's not just about what Jesus brings for you. It's about the engagement with Jesus that brings out you. So we don't hear that in any of the stories either, do we? That's not entirely true, actually. Some of the healing and miracle stories that we hear, every now and then there's a story about somebody who goes and tells people, or somebody who follows Jesus because they were transformed. That's so much a better word than change. That's what this is about. What does it feel like? What's the difference in feeling to you if I say, the thing about church is that it should change you? Or the thing about church is that it should be transformational. There should be transformation, not just of you, but of church. The thing about being a church, being a community which calls itself a church, isn't just being inside a building. It's you, right? We talk about this. We've talked about it a lot. It's about the people. This is the place we gather, but it's the people who gather here. But the thing about being the people that gather here is that if you don't have a sense of belonging, we're not creating that sense of community that church is supposed to be about. We're just people showing up for an hour on Sunday morning, sitting in a pew, hoping that the fans are working if it's hot today. Otherwise, we're going to nod off. But when we belong, we bring something. And we feel that it's valued and it's part of who we are. That's the thing about being an affirming church, by the way. That's the language of affirming, right? Affirmation. It's not just about saying, yeah, we welcome everybody or we'll take anybody. It's about saying, we affirm who you are and that you should be that. Because that's what we're about. Because that's what Jesus is about, right? Jesus is about affirming you, the true you. Remember, we're created in the image of God, right? Our default setting is good. It is. That's what Jesus teaches us to live from. When Jesus wants you to love one another the way I loved you. I showed you that it isn't just about behavior. It's not about just like the stuff you do every now and then. It's about how you live and how you share that life with other people. You can't just care for one because you like them. You need to care for this person that you don't like. You need to engage people for who they are and how they are. Maybe even help them to understand that they belong. They're valued for who they are. That's part of that sense of belonging. That's what all that has to do with Dorcas. Again, in the 21st century, that's kind of an unfortunate name, but nonetheless, Dorcas, or Tabitha, that's how she was living. That's why she's referred to as an apostle of Jesus. Is she was living the way Jesus wanted people to live. She was caring for others. She was loving people. She was using the skills that she has to share with other people. I don't know if you've ever either belonged to or noticed that women's groups in the church often call themselves Dorcas groups. Very traditional name, but it reflects the fact that that group is active in the community, caring for others. It might also the group might also might involve sewing or clothes or anything like that, but it invariably means that group is active in the community doing things for others, because that's what Dorcas or Tabitha was all about. Living the life of Jesus. One day it's going to catch on. And if it doesn't, I'll just keep saying Jesusing and hope that it catches on. Because Jesus is a verb. It's not just about the one story or the other story, or I like this story, or how about this time that Jesus did this? Because 5 minutes later he did something else that probably isn't in the story, but also represented how we should live every moment, every day. We have these wonderful stories that invariably present Jesus as always doing the right thing, never getting angry. Oh, okay, once. Never being wrong. Actually, no, there's stories about that too. Never changing his mind about, okay. The whole point of those stories is to reflect the fact that love is here, living like us. That's Jesus. We have stories that show how well that went, mostly. But imagine, Jesus lives every moment. There would have been moments that were hard. There would have been moments of frustration. There would have been moments of disappointment. There would even have been moments of failure, because that's life experience. Jesus doesn't expect you to be perfect like all the stories, but to live every moment. And that means every moment isn't going to be perfect. But it's going to be life. That's why the story, the book of Acts is so important. It's the beginnings of the church, right? Is how we usually describe it. But in fact, it's called Acts because it's what the apostles were doing. It's what the first people that called themselves followers of Jesus were doing. And what were they doing? They were living like Jesus, or trying to. Sometimes it was really hard, which is why Paul had to write them letters. But they were trying to live the way Jesus teaches us to live. That's what it means to belong to Jesus. It's not about ownership. It's not about blindly following. It's about engagement. It's about having a relationship. Not just with Jesus that we know from the stories, but with the Jesus that's in all of us. So here's a huge part of the two-way street. You cannot just be Jesus to others. You also have to look for the Jesus that's in those others. That's the life. To live as Jesus to others, but to also see Jesus in others and be willing to accept that. To be willing to accept what others offer to you, as much as you expect them to offer, to accept what you offer to them. That's what it means to belong. I think that's what it means to belong. And that doesn't just go for churches either. It goes for anywhere that creates community. It goes for any group, organization, institution, society, anywhere we're trying to create community. It's created by acknowledging the Jesus that's in others as well as the Jesus that's in us, and living into that.